Welcome back to the Kirby on Sports podcast. We have another exciting exclusive interview for you exclusively on the Kirby on Sports podcast YouTube page, as we have a former pro NFL player joining us, a former Washington Redskins. So I'm really excited for this one. But first, a huge thanks to our sponsors, PM Plus Reserves, Shenandoah Primitives, Dr. Dave Leadership Corporation, Mark Francis with Icon Real Estate, Barrett, Pest and Termite Services, Shenandoah Music, and Mark Lynch with Guild Mortgage, along with Don't Sleep Energy, the official energy drink of the Kirby on Sports podcast. It all comes your way next on the Kirby on Sports podcast. We won't waste any more time. Again, I'm your host, Josh Kirby. I have a very special guest. If you've ever been to FedEx Field and look up top a little bit, this gentleman's name will be in the Ring of Honor. You can see it anytime you get a FedEx Field. Ken Harvey. Ken, good morning. Great to
Hey,
have
good morning.
you on.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on your show. You've been persistent and making it happen, and glad to be here.
I mean, one thing I will say to start, before, my early fandom of the Redskins, then team Commanders, whichever you will, I would always hear my dad, my grandfather talking about, man, this guy Ken Harvey back in the day, he was good. And now to have you on the podcast, it's just a true honor. So thanks so much for your time.
Hey, my pleasure. That's a way to smooth the make me feel good early on. Very good. I appreciate it. A little bit older, I guess. Your parents, your dad, and your grandparents saying you should have watched this guy, but you have fun. You play a game that you enjoy playing, that you worked all your life to get to a moment to play in the NFL, and you just try to do your best and have a good time.
Unfortunately, a couple days removed from the Commanders' 14-7 loss to the Giants. That must have hurt you and the fan base pretty bad. Just watching that game.
I never really kind of understood the fandom, how like it hurts the fans as much as it does the player, probably sometimes more than it does the player. Sometimes the player, as you play it, you play your game, you think you've done as hard as you could, and you get your paycheck as part of your job. But as a fan, you've waited all week. You've put a lot into it. It's your identity. It's who you want to brag on. You want to feel like you're a part of something good, something winning. And then you see a game that not only you lost, but it was a subpar performance, and guys that that could play better didn't play as well as they could. So it's almost kind of like watching your kids trip and fail, and not just once, but repeatedly all over again, when you've told them and you showed them and you've prayed and you worked with them all the time, and lo and behold, they keep doing it, but you still love them. You still try to love them.
So as a former player, I'd like to get your thoughts. Obviously, I would imagine you heard Jonathan Allen's post-game comments. Can you sort of relate to him after a loss like that? Like after all the words that I will not repeat on here was said?
Yeah. I mean, good for him. I mean, people wanted to finally see some emotion, because after a game, you should be mad. I remember, there were some games where whether it was with the Redskins or the Cardinals, my previous team, that you would come away on a away game and guys were laughing and having fun on the plane and all that stuff. And I'm just looking around and I'm like, you should be pissed off. You should be so mad that you lost the game. And the worst thing is that you shouldn't be content with your performance on the game. I mean, everyone has to have a point of accountability as to what they did in the game. But there shouldn't be anybody celebrating, happy, having fun. You should be mad that you lost a game that you technically, on paper, should have won. There was no reason that you should have lost that game. And that, I guess, what makes me the worst is that it was the way we lost the game. It wasn't that it was such a close game and whatever. It wasn't even really a close game. The only way we scored 7 points was because of a messed up a punt return where he dropped the ball and we got it in short yardage. That was the only way we scored, which was sad compared to, we made the Giants look like an all-pro team. I mean, they got more sacks in that one game than they had all season.
Yeah, absolutely. I gotta ask, just broad aspect, Ken, from your time back in the league to now, because I know you cover it. You have a show we'll talk about a little bit later, but from your time in the NFL to now, what major differences have you seen in the style of gameplay from the time you were in the league to now?
Well, definitely the rule change has made a big difference, and I think a big difference known and unknown. I mean, I could see players where they're easing off or not going all out for a tackle because they're afraid of making a penalty, and then the players jukes them or do something differently because they were easing off, not trying to get the penalty, and the player takes advantage of it, and that irks me with no limit. I think some of the rule changes as far as when they call pass interference and when they don't, how much they allow them to go. Some of those calls can change the outcome of the game, and a lot of those calls that it's okay, but you got to be consistent in it. If you're going to let them play hard the whole game and not call the penalties, you can't at the last 2 minutes all of a sudden start calling penalties on something. So I just think the penalties with the refs is probably the biggest thing. And then maybe training camp, instead of it being that you go into the season ready to play, a lot of teams, if it's not a veteran team, you're missing those 2 or 3 games that you warm up with to get into the format of ready to play. You do that during the beginning of the season, and oftentimes it's a struggle for some teams. So I think that's something that people will just get used to, but that's a little frustrating right now as well.
So you mentioned training camp. That's how we actually met in person. You were walking down the driveway at Commander's Park. Just looking at training camp, I'm sure you were there for a couple hours, seeing what everybody was doing for the start of the season. What was that atmosphere like for you as a former player to see all the amenities? Obviously, the new ownership change with Josh Harris and company coming in. What was that like to see? The sort of all the stuff there, like the bleachers, the cooling tent, the drinking station that like sort of catered more to fans. So it was an enjoyable atmosphere for fans to be at.
Well, I think you said it right there. It was an enjoyable atmosphere. I mean, for you're going against, you want to counter against what was previously seen or thought of, and so this now they presented themselves as we care about the fans and we want them to have a good time as well as watching a team perform, but we want the fans to have an experience, not just be there, not that you're uh, uh, a ticket of how we can get some money from you. We want you to be there and have a really good time. And I think the fans appreciated that. But ultimately, you can treat the fans probably the worst if you wanted to. As long as your team is winning, people will show up and you have to start producing a winning performance. But with that said and done, if you produce a losing performance, but you still make sure you take care of the fans, people go for the experiences. Like you said, your dad and your grandfather talked about me playing football. It's a generational thing. It's something that you want to bring your kids to, or bring your spouse to. It's something that you want to bring your friends to and have a good time in that type of environment. And so I thought they did a really good job this year of making it fun.
In addition to that, come the regular season, they've implemented, and you can probably touch more on when they started this, but the Washington Legends. So they'll have the alumni come out, especially this previous couple of weeks, the Commanders hosting the Buffalo Bills, having 175 plus alumni there. Well, what's that like to have your franchise, the franchise you used to play for, sort of implement this sort of thing? And I know Tim Hightower, sort of the mastermind behind that, the director of alumni services. But what is that like? Having them reach out to be like, hey, you want to come out, watch this and different events too? And what more can you touch on that Washington Legends offers that we might not see?
Well, I think one of it's great marketing, right? You call it the Washington Legends because it was a hard task to try to appease everybody. You got the guys with the history that created the Washington Redskins, that created this brand, this name that people, would sell their house season tickets for. This was their brand, and these are the players who were part of that brand who created this environment of winning. And now all of a sudden you come in and you have a new team with a new brand that wasn't the way people wanted and it wasn't how people wanted it, and you had to try to bring that together. So creating the Legends was a nice way of bridging that gap. Then to bring the guys in, to have them be a part of it, it was really cool in the sense of a lot of times you may see teams that kind of brush players off and say, we don't need you, that was the past, we're about the future, we're about the present, we're about making a name for ourselves, we don't need to have that. And the team could have easily did that and said, you know what, we got to start right now, it's about the Commanders and this is about who we are. But they didn't. And to see your former players being recognized for all they contribute to this area, for all that they contribute to the game of football, for all they contribute to sports in Washington and the surrounding areas, it was cool. And then for me as a former player, it was cool to be appreciated for what you've done. Instead of looking as you as that you're just an old player, we don't need you anymore. You've done your time. Get out the way. It was good to be appreciated and say, man, we really appreciate everything you've done and everything you still do, because there are a lot of players who still live in the communities, in this community, and are still doing good things in the community.
And just touching on that a little bit more, I would imagine a lot of fans would see you at the gate. What is that like to still like be like, hey, I watched you play back in the day or something like that? That recognition must still mean a lot to you, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it's cool. Sometimes it's funny because it's like, oh, my grandparent and my dad, or when I was 2 years old, I watched you and you're like, dang, I'm old. but it's any type of recognition is cool because one, it shows one that you did something enough that you would get some recognition. Two, that they appreciate the fact that you played on the team. I think that's really cool, and it's also cool for me as a if I'm ever there with my sons or my wife, it's cool just so that they can see, your dad played and that people thought this of your dad. So I thought, I think it's always a cool thing to be recognized. Sometimes you are, sometimes you're not. It's okay, but it's really cool when you are, because that's human nature. We all want to be recognized and appreciated for who we are, or what we've done, or what we're doing.
Yeah, it was pretty funny. You were walking down the driveway to training camp, and I spotted you from a mile away. I'm like, that's Ken Harvey.
Yeah. People usually say I can either see his eyes, he got those linebacker eyes, or his walk. It looked like he's walking angry, and it may have been at one time I was walking angry. Now I'm walking because my body hurts. So the look is the same, but different reasons.
Absolutely. But I mean, a pleasure just to meet you in brief passing as well, because I was like, that's Ken Harvey. I got to say hello because we have mutual friends with our guy Andy,
Yeah,
obviously. So
yeah.
I was like, that's how I'll be. I'll be like, hey, I know Andy, and then you'll be like, so
You know what? It's cool, and most guys. I don't think there are too many guys who would not appreciate someone saying hello to them.
yeah.
It always feels good. Obviously there are times where your person's busy or you can't sign every autograph and all that stuff. But I think most guys, when you say hello to them, they really appreciate the fact that you take the time to say something to them and that you remember them. It makes a big difference. Makes a big difference.
Absolutely. So I want to get your thoughts. You started this show called You Gonna Know Commander's Justice.
Yeah.
Really interesting format for a show.
Yeah.
I'd like to get you to talk about how this show got started, and it's sort of like a courtroom setting, if
Right.
you will.
Right. So it's I've always liked to think of myself on the creative side, and I've always watched, you watch Judge Judy, you watch some of these judges shows, and you're like, man, it'd be cool to have a judge show, or more than anything, I wanted to create a show that I thought I could have former players do something on this show, and then have fans participate, but also make it a chance where the former player can create their own personalities and build up their own brand just by doing the show. So the show is called "You're Gonna Know Commander's Justice." I did a version of it, probably like 5 or 6 years ago, and just kind of refine it and retune it until ultimately with COVID, then it kind of moved to Zoom, and then with podcasts with the NFL alumni, that made it easier to do it as a Zoom. And so the concept is, it's fun. It's personality driven, right? You try to have some fun. Two former players and a lady whose grandfather previously owned the Philadelphia Eagles, and her mother was the GM. But we're the judges. We say, why we think the Commanders are going to win. Fan thinks why they think their other team, whichever the team that is going to win. Every once in a while, we'll have a celebrity sports former player guest to help them defend their team. And then at the end, they spin the wheel, and the game is based on the result of the game that Sunday. If the team loses, the fan has to do one of the punishments that's on the wheel. And usually it's just fun. You just have a good time. You talk to each other. A lot of good, I'm realizing a lot of, well, I shouldn't say I'm realizing, but a lot of fans are, they have good personalities, and a lot of them are super passionate, super smart about sports. And so it makes it an interesting show as we can, kind of go back and forth and talk about why we think our team is going to win. It is kind of getting depressing with the Commanders because you're having to defend something that you're kind of like, I don't know. I don't know anymore. And so we've changed the format a little bit to where at the end we place our judgment, whether we thought the team, whether we think the team is going to win or we don't. We can go either way, depending on how well the other person defends why they think their team is going to win. So the judges have the autonomy to go either way.
I'm sure you made your judgment last week before the Giants game. All these reasons why the Commanders
Oh yeah.
should win this game, and on paper, and then coming this past Sunday, they lose 14-7, and it's like, well, that just does not look good.
I mean, I usually don't get mad, but I mean, I went to the gym and worked out because I got to burn off some steam. I was angry. It was angry because it was like I said, it's like your baby. You see them, and you know the potential they have, and you're looking at them and you're saying, "Come on, guys, you got this." And you keep, I kept justifying that, okay, well, they started off slow, but they're going to come back after halftime. And then after halftime, okay, well, they'll come back in the fourth quarter. You keep looking at these moments where you say they can come back, and it never happens. And you're kind of like, this is your opportunity to walk away, dominating on the team that you're supposed to dominate on, and showing everybody that you're a lot better than what people think. But now I'm maybe have the face of reality. They're not as good as I think they are. And I'm gonna have to start basing my opinion based off of realities instead of what I believe. Let's look at some cold hard facts and see there's some weaknesses with our team, and other teams know how to take advantage of it.
I mean, just looking at this team on paper, the defense with Sweat, Young, Payne, they're all really athletic. In my mind, the secondary needs some work because they're letting passes get by them. They're not making clean tackles. And offensively, you have the young quarterback in Sam Howell, which he's doing an all right job, but I think he could do so much better if the O-line could protect him just a little bit more. Just your thoughts on the Commanders as a whole from this season. Who are you liking? Who do you really think needs to step up?
I mean, you pretty much summed it up. So I think the team defensively, they went into the season banking on the fact that their defensive front four would dominate. And while they've played well, they haven't dominated the whole game, right? So then you think if all your dependency is on the front four, your linebackers and your secondary, you think, well, our front four would do so much that even if they're average, we can take care of that. That's proven not to be the case, and everybody's being exposed. Your secondaries, players are getting past them, and poor performance in the tackling, or they're trying to do too much. The linebackers are doing well as far as maybe tackling, but coverage-wise, they're not as good covering people. And so if your front four aren't having an outstanding game every game, then the whole game is a mess. And we'll see the results of it. Teams are able to pick them apart. On offense, definitely offensive line. You look at them, and the Giants played a smart game, but it's not something that we didn't see coming. You knew that the Giants were a blitzing team, and you knew that you were going to have to pick up the blitz. Knowing it and actually doing it is two different things, which they showed that they couldn't produce. They haven't stopped teams that are one-on-one, and they haven't stopped teams that are blitzing. So now you got a quarterback who has good fundamentals, but now he's rushing the ball. He's starting to get gun shy. He's throwing the ball away. He's throwing interceptions. Everyone's looking at him saying, "What's wrong with you?" They're saying he's holding on to the balls too long. Maybe he is. Our running game, we're not really using our running game as much. And we haven't really defined what type of team we're going to be. And if your quarterback can't throw the ball, then your receivers you got some great receivers on our team that can't produce the way they want to because he's getting hit all the time. So I think ultimately, if you look at the whole package, it goes back to the coaches. You got to understand the team that you have and how to get the best out of what you have. And I'm not sure if they're doing that right now, or if they're so shell-shocked by what they don't have that their whole dependency is now everything's kind of in a rush to try to make up stuff. Whereas you didn't realize in the beginning that, what happens if your D-line isn't dominant? Who do we need to fill this void? Or is just being exposed, and now we're seeing it. Maybe it's something that they saw and they knew. What frustrates me the most, I'm sorry talking so long, is when I heard earlier that players were complaining that Bieniemy was working them too hard. And I'm like, there's no way in the world some players should say he's working us too hard, because the reality is now all of a sudden you're seeing what working too hard or not working too hard is producing. The game's going to be fast paced. There are going to be a lot of good players. There are going to be guys coming at you all the time. You got to play hard. You got to play fast. You got to play with your tongue hanging out and have that desire to keep going, because that's the way the NFL is. And even the worst team is still better than most teams. The worst teams can beat any team at any given Sunday, and that's kind of shown throughout the season so far. Every good team has still gotten beat by somebody. I don't think there's an undefeated team right now.
Nope.
And so it's anybody's beatable.
And I was actually going to mention that next, going back to when it was publicly stated that some players came to Rivera saying Bieniemy's working them too hard. I think that would have been unacceptable back in your time when you were playing for the Redskins, right?
You'd have found yourself in the unemployment line. You talk about you working too hard. You got to bite your tongue and suck it up and deal with it. I was a little shocked that players said, and I was a little shocked that the coaches mentioned that players said. Both factors, because one, if you mention it, then players lose trust in telling you stuff, and sometimes they need to tell you things for you to correct yourself. But then two, most players shouldn't say that, and if you do say it, the coach's job is to like, hey, son, this is the game. It's going to be moments when it's too hard, and it's going to be moments where it's tough to overcome, and that's when you have to dig deep and push yourself. That's an unfortunate part. I will say this: I did like Jonathan Allen getting mad, because I think the team is still young, and So a lot of times winning teams have a veteran core that will be the ones that have pushed the young guys beyond where they need to go. I don't know if the veteran core on this team see themselves as veterans and can push the young guys to go beyond where they can go, or if it's the coaches and where they can't push the guys to go where they can go, or if just the talent isn't there. And that may be the case. The talent isn't there. Every new organization with a new ownership, this year is kind of auditioning for everybody, and then they'll get rid of people, they'll bring people in and try to build up the team the way they think. And you better believe the number one thing will be probably getting the O-line, the build up the team.
So I know this might be a loaded question as the next question here, Ken, but what in your mind do you think the Commanders need to do to sort of turn this around and get on a winning streak?
Okay, so it's a good question. So I think one, you always hear like there's a player only meeting, and people have to go back and readjust and figure out, what do I need to do to win? I think one-on-one, individually, players have to look at themselves and say, what do we need to do to win? Defensively, I think that there are some weaknesses. So groups need to take some responsibilities for themselves and set some goals. Defensive front, we're not going to let anybody run past us and get past 2 or 3 yards. We're gonna make sure we're hitting the quarterback every time he throws the ball. Secondary or linebackers, we got to set the goal of there's no one that's going to get past the line of scrimmage. If they do, we're going to knock them, hit them so hard that they're going to cry. We're going to cover our guys, and if we're weak in covering our guys, and we may have to stay after practice a little bit longer, but we're going to figure out how to do this. And then the same thing secondary. On offense, the offensive line definitely. I don't know how they practice anymore. I don't go to their practices, but even in practice, the practice should be so hard that when they walk into the game, it becomes like, oh, okay, I got it. Because right now, I don't know if this is the way the O-line looks, then maybe they're not experiencing that with practice. When I practice, we went as hard. We went so hard that when you went into the game, anything you saw in the game was nothing more than what you saw in practice, because that's the way the guys practice. So maybe they need to see that. I think offensively, you need to stick to a game plan. If you're going to have a running game plan, let's stick to the running game plan, but then adjust in the sense of not straight up the middle all the time. Maybe you go outside, maybe you go inside, maybe you do a couple of dumb passes out, but stick to the short game running passes that then you say, I'm going to let it produce, and then game plan based off of that. So I think I think you put the blame on everyone, and it goes from the players to the coaches. I don't think it's not the guys don't want to win, but I think that there's a responsibility in everyone as far as what they can do to adjust this. And when it is the players only meeting, and guys have had that and they've turned it around. It's more when we're in there, everyone's yelling, then everyone's like, we got to go out there and we got to step it up. And then you become accountable to everybody. Now all of a sudden, you're not as good as you think you were. And I think that was the biggest problem. The team thought that they were a good team before they actually proved that they were a good team. And now you're kind of reeling off of it because you're like, oh, I thought I was great, but you got hit in the mouth. Oh, I thought, we were a new team with new organizations. We're the Commanders, and everyone's shaking our hands, and we're the game's sold out, and we're and we're gonna automatically win this game because we're good and we got all this talent. Good teams understand that having talent on paper isn't the same as having talent on the field, and you got to go out there and produce it.
Very well said from Ken Harvey. So we'll just have to wait and see what the Commanders can do for the rest of this season. But Ken, before we let you go, I forgot to mention you're also a motivational speaker as well. Sort of touch on that aspect of your life post football. What has that been like, going out and doing motivational speeches?
I appreciate you mentioning that. I mean, I just think sometimes people need boosts. Look, I like to talk to our team, but sometimes people need a boost to refocus or to recapture all that they're thinking, but it's all scattered all over the place, or something that they don't know. And so you got to find a way to pull it all together and give them some points and say, these are some of the things that you need in order to achieve what you're trying to achieve. And I think a lot of times we get so busy and so scattered and so distracted, or don't understand it, or no one's speaking our language to tell us these are the things that'll make you great. These are the things that you need in your corporation or your business that can help you become great. And maybe when you hear from, like I'll say, if you hear from your parents all the time, sometimes you don't want to listen to it. But then you get the guy off the street that you respect or that you look up to, or that just says it in such a way, and he'll say the same thing, maybe in a different format or maybe a little bit different than your parents, but basically the same thing. And you're like, oh, I just heard the greatest idea, and it clicks. And that's kind of what a motivational speaker does, is that it's a person who comes in and can speak to maybe some of the issues or some of the things that you're dealing with, or you or your company are dealing with, and can put it in a way that everyone gets it and understands, and then acts on it.
And I know also our mutual friend Andy, you do stuff with his church. And sort of my next question there, yeah, what's it like for you just giving back to the community?
Well, I mean, it's so for me, it's kind of, in one way, it's a little selfish in the sense that when you give back, you get a chance to see life from a different perspective. Sometimes we get caught up in our own little bubbles, and we don't see it from someone else's point of view. And when you give back, then you get to see, like, wow, here I'm complaining about my hip hurting and my knee hurting, but this person has been paralyzed all their life, or this person has been going without food, or this person's parents were abusive, and here I am complaining about these little things that I have. And you start getting things from a totally different perspective. Or you see the innocence of a kid, and you're like, wow, you know what? They're looking at life like there's so much out there, when I'm looking at life where I'm like doom and gloom. And so I give back because, too much is given, much is expected. I've been given a lot in my life. And so it's fun to give back, or to try to give back as much as possible. And so I do various things. Andy with his church, you start looking at pastors who are doing it because they see it as a higher calling. I think we all have gifts, and I think the issue is, excuse me, the problem is sometimes we expect players to give back, we expect entertainers and actors to give back, we expect people with money to give back, but we don't expect ourselves, who may not have all those things, but you also have a responsibility and an opportunity to give back and to help somebody. It could be something as simple as a smile, volunteering a day, volunteering an hour, cooking a meal for somebody. Some little thing can change a person's life, and you just don't know. Even just picking up the phone and saying, hey, how are you? How are you doing? Can change a person's life and make a big difference.
And last but not least, where did the idea for your children's book come? Because that's really awesome about that book.
Well, so I have a bunch of them, so I'm not sure which one, but
Oh, you do?
yeah. So the first book I did was called "Come Find Me." It was a children's book with one of my boys when they were 8 and 6, and I wanted my boys to see themselves as a character in the book. During that time, there weren't a lot of African American books, and so I didn't think about it, but I started listening to my kids, seeing that they saw characters on TV and characters in books, but they never saw themselves. And I was like, wow, I want my kids to see it, but I don't want it to be any type of book other than any other kids see it, because it's what they're doing. It's not the color of their skin or who they are. It's just what they're doing, having fun. So I did my first children's book called Come Find Me. And Terry Crews, who's America's Got Talent and actor, was on the team at the time, and he did amazing artwork, amazing job with the artwork. And then 20 some years later, we added augmented reality to the book, so that people can use augmented reality, take their phone with the app and look at the picture, and it comes to life on your phone. That was kind of the beginning of me writing. I've written this one book here in my head, Stepping Stone, as a book about my life and my journey making it to the NFL. I've written 2 thriller suspense novels, and about maybe 7 other children's books, just because I try to plant a seed, and hopefully the books help somebody. But I just remember me reading a book or seeing some, pictures, and you kind of like, oh, okay, wow, you see life from a different perspective, and that's kind of cool.
My man, you're writing books, you're a motivational speaker. You must be keeping busy post football.
I've kept busy. I'm on a journey now with finding myself, redefining like who am I and what am I supposed to be doing. As me and my wife talk, we're closer to 80 than I am 30, and so you start looking at life a little bit different. And you're like, what is my legacy? What do I want to leave behind? And while it is the children's books, and I do want to help people, there are other things that I think that I've been put on this earth to do, and so I'm focusing on trying to get better at some of those things. At the very least, to listen a little bit and see what God is telling me, that He wants me to do, and just be obedient in that. So,
Once again, Ken Harvey, former NFL player. He played for the then Washington Redskins and the Cardinals way back in the day, joining us here on the Kirby on Sports podcast, exclusive on the Kirby on Sports podcast YouTube page. My friend, it's been such an honor, such a pleasure chatting with you on this podcast today. Really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can catch up again really soon, my friend.
yeah, appreciate you. I know it's having a podcast of my own. I know it's difficult to hunt down guests and to keep them and to get them on time and all that stuff. So I appreciate you working with me and your tenacity and making sure this happened. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm telling you, podcasting, like I started this like 5.5 years ago, and
Wow.
just from there, it just kept booming. I've had like people like Clinton Portis,
Nice.
all the sports anchors, you name it, just about everybody. I've met numerous connections, numerous people. So I get where you're coming from. Podcasting, it just opens up a new sort of reality in terms of what you can do with a podcast to make it better and more unique in your own ways. And
Right.
I feel that's what you're doing as well with You Gonna Know Commander's Justice.
Well, yeah, look, that's what I'm trying to do. I appreciate it, and hopefully as we work on it and build out the format. My dream would be that each place that has a football team, we can have a You're Gonna Know, Raiders Justice, or You're Gonna Know Philly Justice, and then just have a big party at the end. So hopefully, this is the beginning of a big, some type of franchise.
Well, Ken, I appreciate the time once again, and hopefully we can get you back on again really soon. But take care of yourself, my friend, and really appreciate your time.
Awesome, buddy. Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.